the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. Citizens of Russia, Federation Council members and State Duma deputies, the annual address to the Federal Assembly is a demand that is enshrined in the Constitution of the Russian Federation. The Constitution marks the 20-year anniversary today, and I congratulate you on this significant day. And of course, we also mark the 20-year anniversary of the Federal Assembly, which was set up in accordance with the Constitution. The Constitution combined the two principles: the high status of the citizens' rights and freedoms, and it also underlines the mutual respect between the state and the citizens. And I believe that this foundation should be strong. And now I refer to the second chapter of the Constitution, which provides for the rights and freedoms of citizens. Of course, the constitution process is not cast in stone, is not finished. Based on the legal practice, based on life, some adjustments could be made. As you've heard, there have been some amendments introduced to merge the Supreme and Higher Arbitration Courts. What we see is that they deliver different rulings on the similar cases, and sometimes this results in uncertainty and injustice inflicted on people. And I believe that if we merge these courts, our legal practice will be unified, and that will help to bolster the main constitutional principle, and that is equality of everyone before the law. The Constitution provides for the main unifying ideas. The basic idea behind a social state is the social responsibility of every citizen, of every business, and we need to support the growing demands by the people, by the entrepreneurs, by the business community to take part in the life of the country. And we need to support the civic activities in municipalities so that people could have a direct opportunity to take part in deciding the lives of their municipalities. There are a lot of problems that we're seeing today, and the scope of activities and workload is not balanced, as you know. And very often we see a chaos among authorities. They are vague and they are shifted from one level of authority to another, from the regions to municipalities and back and forth. And of course we see corruption scandals emerging. The district level is really vague. The authority in terms of healthcare, education have been handed over to the regions. But the municipal powers have to be really close and accessible. It should be within the reach of every person. That's why I'd like to address the Congress and municipal organizations and the Federal Council members and the governments of the Russian Federation. Let's look at these problems again very thoroughly so that we see some common sense here, so that these practices meet the demands of the time. We need to refine the principles of self-government. We need to develop the municipal authorities and so that they become stronger. And we need to provide the legislative framework for that in the next year, which will mark the anniversary of the municipal reform, which was made back in the 19th century. And that reform, that landmark reform, was also provided necessary conditions for Stolypin's reforms and reforms during World War I. I believe self-government can become a major resource for the renewal of our human resources potential. And of course, we need to see motivated, responsible people in the power. That's why we'll continue to develop political competition to improve political institutions, to make them more transparent and open. The elections that we had have demonstrated that there is less formalities in the election, and we see a lot of new parties getting stronger. They've won power, they've won a lot of votes, and they could take part in the elections for the federal authorities and could compete with old-timers. We need a broad discussion on major issues with practical results so that public initiatives, civic initiatives, become part of the policy and agenda, and every decision is controlled by the state. All strategic plans need to go through the zero reading, including the participation of NGOs and other civic society organizations. The federal authorities and regional authorities, too, need to set up public councils, and they should work together with them. It shouldn't be just a formal facade structure. These councils must serve the role of experts. They need to become opponents. They need to help to fight corruption. To provide for a legal framework, I'd like to ask the Human Rights Council, the Public Chamber and other organizations to take part in the drafting of the law on public control. We need to support human rights organizations. We believe that they should not be politically biased, that they would serve the interests and problems and help to solve problems of Russian citizens. Of course, the public chamber needs to grow in terms of authority. It should become the center of interests of different communities. We should have more professionals there. At least half of the members of the public chamber appointed by the president should be from these professional communities. And such approach will help us to keep the balance of interest between different communities and to account for the problems that they face. Among the biggest challenges we are facing today is inter-ethnic relations. There are a lot of problems in this area, which are also related to corruption, to economic problems, to the education and cultural shortfalls. And all leads to misinterpretations of ethnic identities. And it's not just provoked by some people. We're not talking about that. We are talking about individuals who are just... Some of them are from the southern regions of Russia, some corrupt officials, police officers who provide the protection for them, and also some Russian nationalists, those who can stir conflict and hatred out of any routine conflict. We need to consolidate the Russian state. Distinguished colleagues, In my May decrees of 2012, I set out specific measures that would help to provide for the dynamic development of the country. It was a sort of an action plan that accumulated the will of the people, the aspiration of the Russian people for the better. Sometimes we hear that unfortunately, there is not enough money to implement all of these May decrees, that we need to downgrade our forecasts and to simplify the tasks. Colleagues, I now move on to a very important task. We shouldn't be too formal. Of course, we are well aware that economic trends always go in ups and downs, but it doesn't mean that we have to revise our strategies. We need to refocus our priorities. The budgets of all levels need to shift to the priority-based approach. It means that every manager, every leader should be held liable and responsible for what they do. We increase the salaries in healthcare and education so that their jobs become prestigious again, so that new students go in these areas. But of course, but these salary raises shouldn't be just covered by the expenditures from the budget. We need to implement reforms. People need to see that the work of our clinics, hospitals and schools is improved. So apart from these pay rises, we need to introduce more things. We need to provide certification for our staff. We need to provide financing for public and private education institutions and healthcare institutions that provide the best quality. We need to increase competition, and we need to engage these socially responsible businesses and NGOs. And we need to cut down on inefficient practices. So where are all these measures? So it's been a year and a half since I signed these decrees in May of 2012. And what I see is that maybe you either do it in a way that causes negative response from society, or nothing is done. Of course, we can't achieve the task that we set out in this way. There have been too many delays, and the people who are consumers of services have not been able to see any tangible effects. We allocate a lot of finances, but if we go this way, we only increase the number of bureaucrats. And that's what's happening. I'd like to point out, I'd like to draw the attention of the leaders of the regions and the federal authorities. We need to come up with a mechanism of independent assessment procedures for the federal institutions. It will help us to cut the costs. We need the new laws that will define the responsibilities and criteria for every institution, that will measure the efficiency of their performance. And I would like to address you to pass such a law within the autumn session. We have seen a lot of improvements in the healthcare sector. The life expectancy is going up, the mortality rate is down, the birth rate is up, but we need to see more changes. The insurance industry needs to get improved. A lot of funds are being channeled through the extra budgetary fund, but it's not the way it should be done. People need to feel the responsibility for their health. They need to get incentive for leading a healthy lifestyle. Insurance companies need to be motivated that the clinics they work with provide the best level of service, and that the people should get the opportunity to choose the best institutions. And of course, the funds that we allocate need to be passed down to the clinics. And of course, consumers need to be aware of what kind of services are for free and what should be paid for. And preventive care needs to be bolstered. All the teenagers need to go through annual checkups. And adults should go through medical checkups once in 3 years. We'll see more diagnoses. We'll see demand for better healthcare services. And we've provided support for medical centers in the so-called federal cities. But we've founded a network of medical centers across Russia. We need to build on their potential, and these services should not be just available to the residents of the cities where they're located, but also to the people from other regions. And we need to provide for the financing for this. Within the next 3 years, we need to create conditions to do 1.5 more technological, high-tech operations than we do today. Of course, we need to catch up with the world trends. The leading countries are introducing technologies which are based on the human genome, on biomedicine. That will be a revolution in healthcare. And of course, the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Ministry of Healthcare need to conduct research in these areas. And of course, professionals in these areas, the captains of industry, need to be given more authority in this. The healthcare ministry needs to come up with solutions in this area. We need to revive the traditions of charity. We need to organize a large chain, a network of volunteers. And volunteers who've worked for several years in medical institutions need to have some advantages when they apply to a medical educational institution. Of course, the upcoming year has been announced as the Year of Culture. It will be a year of enlightenment. We need to get back to our cultural roots. We need to talk about morality and patriotism. Of course, we all know the role, the encompassing role of Russian culture and the Russian language and its unifying role. And we need to consider that when we consider the education policy. We don't just need the schools that teach. We need schools that imbue culture, that bring up a personality with a broad horizon, great inner culture that are possible of independent thinking. And starting from next year, we'll have, apart from the standardized exam, students will also have to write the final essay, and that will be included in the record books. Of course, teachers need to be able to use some modern technologies. They need to be able to work with children with disabilities. And of course, we need to come up with new retraining programs. I know that the Education Ministry is working on that. We need to finalize this work. We need to finalize this program. There is another major issue, a very urgent one. Today, we see that education to that curriculum is taught in 2 shifts. Of course, thanks to the positive demographic situation, we'll see an increase of school children by 1 million. And I would like to address the federal and regional authorities. We need to assess the scope of this problem. We need to provide effective solutions. We need to build preschool facilities so that they could be used as primary education facilities. This should not, of course, increase the cost of construction. It could be a dual-role facility. Of course, this is the regional authorities that have to take care of that. But we need to assess the scope of these problems. If it's such a big issue, of course, some kind of federal assistance needs to be provided. And of course, we need to continue to develop the infrastructure for youth sports, for mass sports. We need to boost the prestige of a healthy lifestyle. And that's why we've invested so much in the 2013 Universiade in Kazan, the World Cup and the Sochi Olympics. I'm sure that will provide all the necessary conditions for the best Olympics.
According to the statistics, in December this year, natural increase of population was detected in Russia, first time since 1991. And that is a very good sign. Fertility in Russia has increased mortality in almost half of the regions of the Russian Federation, almost in all regions of the Urals and Siberia. In most regions of the Far East, it is far ahead of the average Russian statistics. But we also need to understand that it is the generation of the 90s that are coming to make up families these days, to become parents these days. And they come from an era when the decrease in demographics was catastrophic. So we must do everything to ensure that this improvement of the situation would not be reversed. I would like to remind you that the best demographic statistics we had in Russia were in the 1980s, and that was also the time of a peak in housing construction in the Soviet Union. And these days, housing construction must also become a driver for an improvement in the demographics. The government has already laid out its approaches for a program for constructing affordable housing. We need to build no less than 25 million square meters of affordable housing, complete with infrastructure for middle-class families in the next several years. And I suggest that we name this program Housing for Russian Families to focus our attention on this agenda. By the year 2016, we need to provide 75 million square meters of housing by the year 2015. And that is way ahead of the peak of the 1987. Modern-day technologies enable us to provide easily constructed, affordable and comfortable housing. But first of all, we need to adopt all the necessary amendments to the Russian legislation in order to unblock the process of allotting land for construction purposes, for development purposes. We've been debating this issue at length, and in the past weeks we have taken up this issue several times. Land control authorities would need to follow transparent procedures in putting up land parcels, land allotments for construction. But also developers will have their responsibility too. If they fail to begin development or construction, they would need to return the land to the government. We will need to provide infrastructure for development. We will need to sort out sources of financing and establishment procedures. I know that fiscal authorities in Russia have been proposing to start regulating internet trade, internet commerce. And I think this would also be helpful, and I suggest that we develop our provisions for that. I also request that we provide a comprehensive and complex set of documents needed for authorizing construction, and I would like this work to be finalized by March 2014. My colleagues should be aware of why the situation is still as it is, why the issue is not being solved, and that is because of corruption. There is a high level of corruption in this area, and we need to realize that. We're all aware that in order to achieve the goals of social development, we need to provide sustainable economic growth. And here I am referring to the core of our work. Of course, we still sense the impact of the global economic crisis, but we also need to admit that the main reasons for the slowdown of Russia's economic development come from internal and not external reasons. Yes, Russia is one of the world's top five economies by rate of economic growth, but by efficiency of labor, we are 2 times behind the world's leading economies. We need to close this gap, and for that we need to employ the well-known growth factors, such as a good quality system of education and a flexible labor market, a good investment climate, and a good climate for technical innovation. And therefore, I command that the government, together with the Russian Academy of Science, figure out the priority areas of scientific development and research. And the recently established Russian Scientific Fund will need to take up the task of financing long-term research programs, considering this as a national task, as a task of national importance. Recently, during meetings with the Parliament and in the run-up to this address to the nation, we have looked at several projects for innovative development. You all voted for the Act for Innovation. I suggest that both chambers of the Russian Parliament appoint their representatives, their envoys, to the Russian Chamber of Innovations. I suggest that we reorient the pinpoint targeted financing programs to these most promising areas of scientific research. And it's important to follow the principle of co-financing of scientific research projects by both the government and the private sector, private businesses. Nowadays, only 1 in 6 research projects in Russia becomes an object of protection of copyright. Only 1% of intellectual property in Russia is protected by copyright, and that is very, very small. In the US, it is 12%. In Germany, it is 7 to 8%, and in Finland, it is 20%. Research in Russia must be oriented toward a specific result, and that is getting patented new technologies, getting a result. We need to stimulate, to ensure demand in Russia for high tech, for advanced technologies. We need to stimulate government procurement and the activities of Russia's state-owned companies to be oriented toward innovative products. Lately, in Russia, the work of the scientific community has been splintered into a multitude of think tanks and institutes, each involved in their own activities. Sometimes those activities are not even science-related, but that is not the purpose for their existence. They were initially set up for fundamental research. We need to provide a technological breakthrough for the Russian economy to rid it of outdated and even hazardous technologies. For that, we also need to establish and enable a system of environmental governmental control and oversight for the Russian economy, however grand this task is. I also suggest that we establish a system of statistical assessment of Russia's various areas of economy, various industries, in order to have an objective image, an objective understanding of our competitiveness. Such a system existed back in the Soviet time, but it was completely disemboweled, completely liquidated, and we have nothing of the kind. Today, we still have a lot of administrative barriers in the economy. You need 20 days to receive an export permit. In the U.S., it is only 6 days, and in South Korea, it is only 8 days. We need to keep that in mind in our new roadmap for the support of export. The government, together with the Agency of Strategic Initiatives, needs to develop such a roadmap by March 1st, 2014. Dear colleagues, a leading role in the economy should belong to advanced production standards and quality standards, but they can only work in case there is a demand for such standards by businesses themselves. Therefore, professional associations and business communities need to get engaged in developing such standards. I suggest that we set up a council for professional standards, and not as a government authority, but as an association that would unite professionals, the businesses, and the experts. In 2 years, this council needs to develop a package of professional standards. And I call on our colleagues from the business community not to avoid this work, because it is in your core interests. We need to retune our system of professional education and training in Russia to that end. We can use a lot of our own expertise and also borrow some experience and best practices. I'm referring to restoring professional orientation, professional training in Russia's average schools, and restoring the system of professional training of vacation colleges in Russia. We also need to establish a system of internship so that training could be supported by actual practical work. I would also like to refer to higher education in Russia specifically. Most teenagers in Russia strive to get a higher education, and Russia's schools and universities must comply with these high demands and expectations. However, today, both in Russia's capitals and in the regions, a lot of schools and institutes and colleges leave a lot to be desired. I believe that we need to use the potential of the country's best universities to improve our entire system. We need to delegate to them the rights to assess other schools and also ensure that graduates are in demand in the labor market, and that the Russian economy gets some real value from those graduates. We also must ensure that the mobility of Russian citizens is not restricted. And with regard to this, we need to look at the prices for student dormitories and hostels in Russia. It must be affordable. I ask the education authorities and self-organization, self-governing bodies of students to look at this issue. We cannot increase this rent forever. And I would like to address principles that at some point we'll come to a situation when the Russian Ministry of Finance will track your own earnings and compare it toward the situation, the financial situation of your schools, and compare it. Unless you do better, we will resort to that. We need to improve the education system in Russia, both for Russian nationals and for foreign students, for exchange students, especially for students coming from CIS countries. That is a very strong instrument of enhancing Russia's intellectual and cultural influence in the world. We need to ensure mutual recognition and acceptance of education documents across the Commonwealth, across the CIS. We also need to give a thought to setting up centers for the common state exam to be taken outside of Russia in CIS countries. Such centers could be set up on the basis of Russian culture centers in these CIS countries. And every citizen who graduates from a school, from a high school in a CIS country and passes exams in such a center should be entitled to entering any of Russia's best schools, any of Russia's best universities. We need to provide opportunities for professional training to both Russian citizens and CIS citizens. We need to provide for them an opportunity to do requalification and train for a new profession if need be. They also need to have an opportunity to move to another city or another region to get a job if there is such a necessity. We need to provide them information services, such as setting up a federal database for job vacancies, so that any resident of Russia could see an available job in another region, in any region of Russia. We also would need to work on a lot of auxiliary and additional programs, such as affordable housing and so on. There is a whole list, but it is possible if we take to it. We also need to make our rural territories more habitable and more comfortable. We have invested a lot already in the agricultural sector in Russia, and on many items of agricultural products we have completely provided for Russia with our domestically produced goods, and I would like to thank our farmers for this success, for this achievement. Now, at the forefront, we have a task of making people stay in rural areas rather than move to cities. I would like you to give this special attention when amending the state program for developing the agro production complex in Russia. I would also like to specially agree such a difficult issue as the so-called mono cities, countries where a single industry is the sole provider of jobs, the sole employer, and a city-forming organism, as we say. There is a total of 15 million people living in Russia in such townships and cities. We need to encourage the emergence of new businesses in these towns. We need to encourage investors to invest in these new startups, new businesses and new industries in these towns, because otherwise later on we'll have to spend more money on trying to somehow allocate this population elsewhere. I would require the government to provide its suggestions on assisting SMEs on resolving the tension in the labor market and on providing the incentives for further economic development in Russia. We all know the situation of regional budgets in Russia, which we cannot be directed by everyday worries alone. I have already supported this initiative that was tabled several times. Every region of Russia can provide 2-year-long tax vacations, tax breaks to companies that are creating a real value in the social sector. Not all governors are applauding here, as I see, but I assure you that tomorrow this provide additional earnings for municipal and regional budgets, because these are new industries that we're talking about. So there will be prospectively new taxable earnings of these companies for your budgets. Just give them time to fledge and to gain their ground. We also need to provide to these startups an opportunity to get all the government services from a single point. We also need to take up such a difficult issue as illegal migration. Not only does it distort the labor market, but also create disbalances in the demographics. It provokes ethnic clashes and altogether creates social tension. We need to enforce stronger penalties on employers for employing illegal migrants. We need to ensure that illegal migrants are banned from the country while people can travel freely and legally on a visa-free basis. We need to ensure that legal migrants who live in Russia have easy options for paying taxes and being part of the system. Right now, the system in Russia is rather cumbersome. A migrant worker has to buy a patent if they work for individuals. But I suggest that legal companies and physical persons alike should be entitled through this patent to hire and employ migrant workers. And their wages must also be set across the average wages in the specific region and territory of Russia. We also need to attract professionals, well-educated experts to Russia in the first place, those who speak Russian and those who know Russian culture and who are close to it. And I also emphasize that a migrant patent must only be valid in the region where it was purchased. If this instrument works properly, it can become a powerful economic instrument for regulating migrant flows. I'm referring to this to the price of this patent in various regions of the Russian Federation. We need to sort out migrants coming to Russia, and it's a normal civilized measure. All governments do that. We need to know what migrants come to us, for which purposes and for how long. And for those migrants who come to us visa-free and are staying in Russia with no stated purpose that we know nothing of as the government, we need to look at those people. And for them, the term of stay in Russia should be limited. And for those who violate the Russian law, their stay in Russia will be abolished altogether. Regarding from the gravity of their crime, from 3 to 10 years, they should be banished from the Russian Federation. This should erect new barriers for those guests to Russia who do criminal or shady activities or who work illegally, very often in degrading conditions, and very often they themselves become victims of crimes, unfortunately. 2 years ago, together with the business community, we started to systematically improve the business climate in Russia, and must tell you there are results, good results. Results that probably few people expected to see, and yet they are there. But we need to go further. By the year 2015, we must have formed a legal basis for comfortable business activities, for comfortable doing business in Russia. Next year, we will launch a national investment rating among Russia's regions. It will become a mechanism for assessing their national business initiative and investment initiative in every single region of the Russian Federation. We also need to provide initiative for those regions of the Russian Federation that are developing their business initiative and their economic base, who have chosen the agenda of providing jobs in their regions. And I would like something that governors will like very much. I believe that if a region is investing in providing industrial and technical parks, business incubators, then additional federal taxes that will come within 3 years from industries based in those regions should return to this region's budget as interbudgetary transfers, in the form of interbudgetary transfers. Attention, please. Within the cost of these regions to establish an infrastructure for such industrial technical parks and so on. You need not laugh. This is a very sane proposal. It was created in much in painstaking discussions with the Ministry of Finance. And I would like to request the Ministry of Finance not to dilute these arrangements, to implement them as they are. Another sensible issue is too much attention from various controlling authorities. Of course, you need to do oversight, but we need to look at reforming the activities. We need to keep on reforming the activities of oversight authorities in Russia. We need to make this area even more transparent. And to that end, I suggest creating a single federal portal where every oversight inspection will be seen, and its motives, its initiators will all be stated, and we will be able to see to what end this inspection was initiated, and most importantly, what its results were. Our statistics in the area of the judiciary is still behind international analogs and best practices. Our chamber of our arbitration still needs to be improved, and I suggest that we develop and pass a law on improving the Russian arbitration court. We need to battle offshore savings in the Russian economy. We need to make Russian businesses bring themselves out of offshore areas. Unfortunately, we yet have to see some results, some success in this area. I must remind you that the shares in TNKBP was done in a non-Russian jurisdiction, even though we know well those who were selling those shares and those who bought those shares, that they were Russian nationals. $11 billion passed outside the Russian budget last year, and half of Russia's 50 billion of investment in other countries was also put through offshores, and those are direct losses for the Russian budget. All that money bypasses the Russian economy and goes through offshore areas. And I have specific provisions for the next year, and here they are. Companies that are registered offshore but belong to a Russian owner or beneficiary must be taxed according to the Russian law, and those taxes are to be paid to the Russian budget. And we need to think of a system to actually get that money, to actually get those taxes. And by the way, such mechanisms and methods do exist, and there is nothing special, nothing particular about it. Some countries are already implementing such systems. If you want to work in the offshore, that's up to you, but your taxes need to come here if your business operations are here. And actually, the world's advanced economies are now applying such measures, and it works. Also, companies registered outside Russia will not be able to gain access to measures of government support from the Russian government, including state-provided guarantees for their loans. They shall also have no access to taking up state-provided contracts or contracts placed by government-owned or partially government-owned companies. In other words, if you want to avail yourself of government support and get all those earmarked bonuses from the government, you need to register, you need to establish yourself in Russia as a Russian company. We also need to provide liability, to provide penalty for deliberately falsified information provided by companies on their economic performance, on their social liabilities, and so on. We need to keep ridding Russia's banking system from the so-called money laundering institutions and laundry shops. The deposits by Russian depositors must be protected by the government. Various schemes using offshore banks and offshore jurisdictions is a widespread embezzlement technology worldwide, and Russia must combat it along with other world's economies. We need to look at it not only with private businesses, but also with companies that are owned by the government or managed by the government. There must be no comfort zones for executives in this area. We know that they get big bonuses, but we will never see we'll never see our economy prosper if we deprive those people of their benefits. They need to have incentives, but we also need to have control. We need to have oversight. Such companies companies must develop their long-term strategies, lay out their long-term goals, and state the responsibility and the liability of their management. We also need to think of responsibility, including financial responsibility for failure to meet those goals by companies and executives. And their strategic plans and long-term plans must be authorized and endorsed by the Russian government. I'm referring to several dozen companies of strategic importance to the Russian economy. There's a list of a few dozen companies. Of course, it means additional strain for government officials, but I'm sure they will shoulder it. They will muddle through.
For example, is the development of Siberia and the Far East. That's our national priority for the 21st century. The challenges that we're facing are unprecedented in scope, and that's why our approaches should be non-conventional. We have also come up with some tax benefits for the projects in the Far East, for the income tax, and I think we can introduce the same tax benefits for the whole of the Eastern Siberia and the Republic of Khakassia. Also, I propose to set up a chain of advanced economic development areas with special economic conditions for facilities, export-oriented facilities which will work in non-raw material sectors. Again, that's for the Far East. And we need to provide for 5-year tax holidays for the corporation income tax, for the land tax, property tax, and what's important for high-tech industries is benefits for the payroll tax, for the payroll levy. What's also important is that we need to provide conditions which are competitive with the key APEC economic centers, including minimum permits for access to energy grids, customs, and access to infrastructure. And that's why we need, by the 1st of July of 2014, to define where these areas will be located and to introduce all the necessary regulatory framework. And that's why the head of the government needs to take personal responsibility for that. And of course, later, as we analyze the efficiency of these projects, we will consider the continuation of these projects. As you know, that there's a new university which was built on Ruski Island. It will help to train new specialists in such areas as biology, robotics, design engineering, space exploration, and the use of maritime resources. I believe that the embracing of the Pacific areas will open up new opportunities and give us additional tools for the active foreign policy. The world development is getting more and more controversial and dynamic, and under these conditions, under these circumstances, the historic role of Russia is increasing, not just as a guarantor of stability, but also as a state which promotes its values in international agenda too. As we see, the media battles and the international political battles are continuing, and other centers are looking for a surge of Russia. We've always been proud of Russian status, but we don't claim to be as a superpower. We don't claim to be a hegemony in a region. We don't impose us on anybody. We don't try to lecture anybody. We'll try to be leaders by protecting international law, by trying to promote respect for ethnic identity. And this is justified for a country like Russia with its rich history and culture, with its multi-centuries experience of tolerance. That's coexistence of different peoples within one state. Today, many countries are reassessing the moral values. We see that the identities are gone. And they don't just demand respect for freedom of people, but these states demand the recognition of the equality of evil and good. But it doesn't just entail negative consequences for society, but it's undemocratic, fundamentally undemocratic, because this is based on abstract ideas against the will of the majority, which do not accept the ongoing changes and the revisions that are going on. And we see that there are more and more people who support the traditional values, values which have underpinned for thousands of years the foundations of civilizations, the families of traditional family, of true human life, including in terms of spiritual life, not a life that is not just about money, but about spiritual values and cultural diversity, the diversity of the world. Of course, this is a conservative view, but if I use Nikolai Berdyaev's words, this conservatism doesn't prevent the movement ahead and upwards. This conservatism helps us to avoid backwardation, going back to chaos, into the dark times. We've seen the attempts, the so-called more progressive model of society, but this has resulted in bloodshed. This has happened in Northern Africa and the Middle East. And also, this dramatic situation has been happening around Syria. And of course, the international community was faced with a choice. Either we go back to diluting the norms of international law, to the zero-sum rules, to multiplying chaos, or to take tough decisions in a collective way. And I believe it's our common success that we chose the solution based on common sense and on peaceful values. We have been able to avoid, at least as of today, a major intervention and the spill over of this conflict, and Russia has contributed significantly to it. We acted in a balanced way, in a thoughtful way. We have never damaged our own interest. We have never undermined the global stability. And that's how a mature, responsible state should act like. And what we've seen is that together with partners, we have went back from a war-like scenario to the dialogue. Chemical weapons in Syria are under international control, and their destruction will pave the way for a stronger non-proliferation regime. The Syrian incident also strengthened the role of the UN. Any international issue should be decided, should be solved through diplomatic means. There should be no place for military interventions, which are not accepted by the international society. Of course, in terms of the Iranian issue, we've just made the first step. We need to continue to be looking for a solution that would protect the Iranian right for a nuclear power and also for stability and security for all the states of the region, including Israel. Well, what we had previously, the Iranian nuclear issue was one of the main reasons why the military defense in Europe was being deployed. Now we see that the Iranian nuclear issue has been Oh, it's being sold, but the missile defense is still being deployed. I'd like to underline that Russia is ready to work with all the partners based on principles of indivisible security. We need to bolster the non-proliferation regime. We need to combat drug trafficking and terrorism, and we will talk about that within the G8 format. And we'll be guided by these principles when we prepare for the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit that Russia will host in 2015. And we are now finalizing our agreement on the Eurasian Economic Union. And by the 1st of June 2014, we'll finalize the draft of the text of this agreement, and it will be submitted to the parliaments of Belarus, Kazakhstan and Russia. And I'd like to urge you to consider this document and to approve it. And Armenia and Kyrgyzstan will soon join the customs union. And of course, as we get more members, other countries will be more interested, including our Ukrainian partners. Before the events in Kiev that we're seeing today unfolding, I believe that all the political forces of this country will come together and resolve all of the issues in the interest of the Ukrainian people. But before all that, Ukraine said that it's ready to attend all of our sessions as an observer. It said it's willing to take part of these sessions and said that it was interested in accepting in signing up to some of the agreements. And if Ukraine is still ready for that, we can continue to cooperate at the expert level. Our union is based on real economic interests, on equality. We'll promote the Eurasian project, but we will not antagonize other projects. We will not, of course, put it in confrontation or in opposition to such a mature project as the EU project. And of course, we'll continue to cooperate with the EU on the drafting of the new basic treaty on strengthening our armed forces. I mentioned the missile defense issue, and here's what I'd like to say again. Of course, we're well aware that the missile defense is just called the defensive, but it's an integral part of the offensive arsenal. And we're seeing new armament systems are being developed, strategic non-nuclear, strategic conventional weapons, and hypersound systems. And what we see appearing is the concept of immediate strike. There is such a concept, and it's being developed actively. The implementation of all these plans could have adverse consequences for global and regional stability. As we see the passion of some of the Western countries for strategic unconventional weapons and the missile shield could undermine all the previous treaties on the reduction of strategic nuclear weapons, and it could also undermine the so-called strategic balance of force. We do understand that, and we know what should be done. No one should have any illusions about the possibility to have a military superiority over Russia. Russia will respond to all those challenges, political and technological ones. We have all the potential for this, and our military doctrine and the new advanced armaments, military systems, will help to ensure the security of the Russian state. Of course, it's still a long way to develop high-precision advanced military systems. But if we look at our armaments today, at our deterrent nuclear forces, we're reaching new levels according to plan. And some of our partners will have to do catch-up work. But we are also working on new strategic systems, which are Navy-based, and we'll continue to build some more nuclear-powered submarines. And so we are currently working on a new strategic bombers and working on target identification systems that work in real time in the interests of the Russian armed forces. And of course, this will help to bolster the space forces. Of course, we will upgrade the army and the air force. And so we have increased the number of private and contract officers by 220,000. And of course, we need to think about some reserves. Of course, students need to have some benefits, but they will have to get the opportunity to go military training and to get a military specialization. This will help us to train the necessary amount of reservists for demanding for the specific military specializations. And the Ministry of Defense needs to come up with an arrangement for this. The funds that we allocate for the rearmament of the army are unprecedented, as you know. The funds are unprecedented, as you know. It's a total of 23 trillion rubles. In the next decades, the defense industry will be loaded with the state's orders. With state contracts, they will be able to re-equip their facilities to come up with new high-tech jobs. About 2 million people are employed in the state industry. Together with their families, it's about 7 million people. They will have enough work and they will get decent salaries. And means that their families will be will have enough funds. But after the state contracts are fulfilled, these facilities need to continue to provide for themselves, and we need to strengthen our positions on the international market. These facilities, these industry facilities, need to switch to the production of civilian products when it's needed. We also said that all the military staff that were on the waiting list by 2012 need to get housing, and that job will be completed. And I'd like to address the Ministry of Defense to come up with an ideal solution for everyone. We'll finalize the issue of housing for our armed forces for the first time in history. That will be done and over with. And that's why we can now move on to building comfortable military cities, military towns. We need to feel the responsibility for the country, and that's part and parcel of the Constitution, and that's a call on every one of us. You all know the strategic priorities of Russia. I've just outlined the methods of how we can achieve them. What's been stated needs to be accomplished without any caveats. That's our major responsibility. It's our duty to strengthen the confidence in a society, and people will be more engaged and will be motivated and will have more motivation to take part in the life of the country. If we pass a decision, it needs to be accomplished. And that should be our motto for the next year, a motto for everyone, for the authorities, for our society. I'm deeply convinced that based on the best traditions of our people, using the advanced method of development, will solve all of the tasks we are facing and will achieve success. Thank you very much for your attention.